Hey, welcome to another one of my videos. I'm Alex, the Wondering Englishman. Thank you for joining me and do stick with me. In today's video, I will be walking around St Katharine Docks. St Katharine Docks is to be found northeast of Tower Bridge. Not to be confused with London Bridge, by the way. That confused some Americans a long time ago, but we'll go back to that a little bit later on. So as I find myself in London at the moment, I figured it's kind of nice to explore my local areas. But wait, there's many tourists in London, such as this one.
No worries. Okay. I took 5 maybe, so 5.
It has to be said, I do take the best photos, even on gloomy days like this, so all the tourists normally stumble in my direction. No, actually really not. It's pretty difficult to avoid the tourists in this part of London. London is one of the most popular cities to visit for a lot of tourists, and hopefully maybe one of the reasons that you're watching this video.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty.
This is one of the hotels right next to Tower Bridge. Not the greatest hotel. I can't say I've ever stayed here, but aesthetically from the outside it's pretty damn ugly. I think it's a 4-star hotel. I'm not endorsing this hotel, but if the hotel wants to contact me, fair play to them. So Tower Bridge just over there.
Welcome to jolly old London.
It's hideous.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
Back in the day, boats would come right up the Thames and sort of drop all their goods off in the sort of the docks that make up this area. Let's give a little bit of background on St Katharine's Docks. I'm just going to refer to Wikipedia for this because reality is, who has all this information in their mind? St Katharine's Docks took their name from the former hospital of St Katharine's by the Tower, built in the 12th century, which stood on the site. An intensely built up 23 acres, that's 9.5 hectares, site was earmarked for the redevelopment by an Act of Parliament in 1825, with construction commencing in May 1827. Some 1,250 houses were demolished, together with the medieval hospital of St Katharine. Around 11,300 inhabitants, mostly port workers, crammed into unsanitary slums, lost their homes. So one rule for the rich, another rule for the poor, really. And can you imagine that? Only effectively 1,250 homes were demolished. Almost 11,500 people lost their homes. So those people were literally crammed into the slum conditions that were really quite prolific in parts of London in the the early 19th century, around, effectively 1825. And obviously only property owners receive compensation, so you can kind of guess that those 11,500 people got nothing. They just got moved on, find a new place. Maybe actually went down to the docks and probably saw a new life in the new world. A lot of them did. London was one of those places that when you went near the docks, you would literally, possibly, some of them be kidnapped and taken out to sea to be workers on many ships, or some would just be sort of like signed up to the Navy or signed up to some merchant ship, and they'd find themselves within 12 to 18 months on the other side of the world. Some obviously would be living a much better life, while others meet a nasty end. The scheme was designed by engineer Thomas Telford, and it was his major project in London to create as much quayside as possible. The docks were designed in the form of 2 linked basins, east and west, both accessed via the entrance to the lock from the Thames. Steam engines designed by James Watt and Matthew Bolton kept the water level in the basins about 4 feet above the tidal river. By 1830, docks had cost over $2 million to build. That's a fair chunk of change back in those days. Telford aimed to minimise the amount of quayside activity and specify the docks warehouses designed by architect Philip Hardwick be built right on the quayside so that goods could be unloaded directly onto them. The docks were officially opened on the 25th of October 1828. Although well used, they were not a great commercial success and were unable to accommodate large ships. They were amalgamated in 1864 with the neighbouring London docks. In 1909, the Port of London Authority took over the management of almost all of the Thames docks, including St Katharine. Sadly, the St Katharine Docks were badly damaged by German bombing during the Second World War. All the warehouses around the eastern basin were destroyed, and the site they had occupied remained derelict until the 1990s. I think it would be a little bit boring if I continued to get the information from Wikipedia. As we've just approached one of the most popular pubs in London, I think it would be fitting to head into the Dickens Inn. This is the Dickens Inn, a very popular pub in the evenings, especially amongst city workers that work nearby around Tower Hill and the Minories area. A lot of these guys will come into the Dickens Inn after work around about 5 p.m. and stay there for the majority of the night until about 11 p.m.
You got your pint, you got your pig snacks. What more do you want?
Very, very old pub, as you can see. And this is a good place to come for a nice ale.
Evening, gents. How about a nice warm lager?
And help yourself to a packet of crisps.
Or a ruddy nice plum pudding.
Holy crap! It's a gay bar!
Not the best ale selection, but if you're in London for the first time and you're in the UK for the first time, you've really got to try ale. Don't waste your time on boring lagers. Try the ales, and this is a good place to have it. As good as any, really. Ale is poured from a cask. The world kind of takes the piss out of us a little bit because it's supposedly at room temperature, but it really isn't. It's actually at the sort of cellar temperature, so it's slightly warmer than chilled, but it's still a very, very tasty pint. And you know what? It's actually, if you're going to be drinking pints, drink pints of ale because it's cheaper, probably by 20 to 25% to your typical beer that's served in a pub. But anyway, this is a walking tour of St Katharine Docks, so I figured it'd probably be appropriate to leave the pub and continue with the tour of what St Katharine's Dock is, although I haven't really given much of a tour other than point out the fact that that was Dickens' Inn, a pub in St Katharine Docks. But let me give you a little bit more on the history of the docks, referring back once again to Wikipedia. So let's start with the closure and the redevelopment of St Katharine Docks. Because of their restricted capacity and the inability to cope with large modern ships, the St Katharine Docks were among the first to be closed in 1968 and were sold to the Greater London Council. The site was leased to developers Taylor Woodrow, and most of the original warehouses around the Western Basin were demolished and replaced by modern commercial buildings in the early 1970s, beginning with the bulky Tower Hotel. Right in front of us, in fact. What an eyesore. You can see that it was open in the 1970s, because it was actually open in September 1973. The really strange thing is some people actually like these sort of grey 70s buildings, but thankfully not many people do. There are way too many of these 70s buildings all over the UK, and hopefully they won't be around for too much longer. This was followed by the World Trade Center building and Commodity Quay, both designed by architects Watkins Gray International. Development around the Eastern Basin was completed in the 1990s, the docks themselves becoming a marina. The development has often been cited as a model of successful urban development. And as you can see, very popular, even at this random time during the midweek when this was filmed. Lots of people sort of sitting out, despite the grey clouds, having lunch. And what a nice place it is to eat, actually. And you know, I do recommend coming down here. It is actually very pleasant, despite the sort of the 70s architecture that we see in front of us. Thankfully, not all of it's looking as visually appealing like that. So the area now features offices, public and private housing, the large hotel that we can still see in shot. It is super big, that hotel. But obviously clearly very popular because of its location, close proximity to Tower Bridge. Various shops, restaurants, which you just saw. The Dickens Inn, forgot to say that it used to be a former brewery and it dates back to the sort of 18th century. Yachting marina, where all the big boys come and park some of their impressive yachts. This place, fantastic noodle bar. It's only recently opened, although I'm saying that it could have been there for the last 5 years, but I have to admit I've only recently noticed it. And it's a good place to come if you like noodles, and very good noodles, in fact. A little bit on the it's mid-range, slightly pricey area, but a good place for lunch, casual lunch. That's what I bracket in when I say mid to pricey for a lunch. Obviously, if you compare it to a top-class restaurant, this place is very cheap. And look what we have here, the Royal Barge, the Gloriana. Well, the Gloriana is 90 feet in length. It's the British Royal Barge, and you might remember it from when Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, celebrated her Diamond Jubilee in 2012. It was the lead vessel in the Thames on the Diamond Jubilee Royal Pageant. A lot of people came out that day. A lot of people just to sort of salute the Queen, give their thanks to the Queen, and I don't even think you had to be a royalist to sort of see that day. It was an enjoyable day for most people that took the time to sort of pay tribute along the Thames. Another boat that's usually docked in St Katharine's Docks is the Havengore, MV Havengore. Made famous because it was best known for carrying the body of Sir Winston Churchill as part of his state funeral. I wasn't there, but I certainly read about it, and I've certainly seen the footage about it. Effectively, on the 30th of January 1965, Havengore carried Sir Winston Churchill on his last journey by water along the River Thames from Tower Pier to Festival Pier during his state funeral. On her journey along the Thames, Havengore was saluted by a flypast of 16 English electric Lightning fighter jets, and dock cranes were bowed as she passed. This event was broadcast live to an estimated worldwide audience of 350 million viewers. That's 1 in 10 of the world population back then. Archived newsreel footage is available via the BBC website. Havengore carries a commemorative plaque presented by the International Churchill Society, inscribed with the words of the BBC broadcast that day, Richard Dimbaby. And so Havengore sails into history. Not even the Golden Hind had borne so great a man. It's a shame, actually, because it's the only boat that's really, really significant and worth seeing at St Katharine's Dock, and I missed it. Maybe it was being serviced or something, or maybe I just simply didn't notice it. If you see it in this video, like in one of the distant boats in the background, please do point it out and timestamp it. I have a feeling it may have been right at the beginning, just as I was walking into the docks and on the left-hand side, but I'm not entirely sure because I wasn't really paying attention. Havengore participated in the river pageant held to mark the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977. And I think it was also used in the 2012 pageant because it carried Duke of York, Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, Countess of Wessex, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, and Princess Michael of Kent. London isn't always this grey. Despite rumours, sometimes we do have blue skies. However, we are grateful for when it's not raining.
London?
Yes, London. You know, fish, chips, cup of tea, bad food, worse weather, Mary fucking Poppins, London.
Despite misconceptions, though, London gets a lot less rain than certain parts of Europe. And it is actually one of the drier parts of the UK. It's just constantly grey and overcast. Well, not. It's just grey and overcast a considerable amount of time. So what I'm doing here is just basically walking around all of the docks, just so you can see every little detail of it. Obviously, when you were to visit or just walk through here, you wouldn't walk around in circles like I've done. But I've walked, in its entirety to sort of give you a sort of idea. There's a slug and lettuce bar just over there. And there, if you just look in the distance, is the Tower of London, and the walkie-talkie just to the right of the Tower of London. and obviously a lot of reasonable restaurants. Ping Pong is particularly good. Café Rouge, a so-called chain. French food that seems to be found almost in every town or city across the UK. However, they have been going for many years, so they must have been doing something right. And I have to admit, I really like the French onion soup Café Rouge does there, and reasonable brunch can be had there. But don't expect to be impressed. It just does it okay. Continue along the walk. You can see the fact that many boats are docked in this port. This is Commodity Quay, named after the fact that a lot of commodities were delivered into the London docks, but also the Commodities Exchange used to be only around the corner, a little bit past Tower Hill. No longer exists. Everything's moved electronic now. I'm a big fan of the Natural Kitchen, actually. Natural Kitchen, superb food. Very good if you're a vegetarian, vegan, even if just trying to be healthy. The Natural Kitchen has a good selection of food, great selection of wine, actually. All of these places are chains. This is the sad thing about London. Certainly in the areas that command a high rental price, only the chains can really afford them. Not many independent restaurants to be found in the locations like this. If you want an independent restaurant, you're going to have to sort of look further afield into the side streets. But because of council rates these days and city taxes, it's very hard for independents to make it. So you make it and then you expand rapidly, a little bit like Jamie Oliver did with all of his restaurants. And then you end up going bust, or you get swallowed up, and that just seems to be how it goes at the moment. So obviously, just heading down here will loop you back into the docks again. I don't obviously want to continue back that way, so I'm going to swivel back this way. This is a fun place. This is Medieval Banquet. It always reminds me of the film The Cable Guy when I walk past this place.
This is medieval times!
Obviously, medieval banquets are found throughout cities all over the world, but for some reason the Cable Guy always sticks out in my mind when I walk past that place. I always remember Jim Carrey sort of going a little bit mental on Matthew Broderick in that film. Fantastic film, massively underrated.
Come back here, so that I may praise thee.
But a good place to go if you're out with some colleagues, you're out with a big group of you, and you want to just sort of swig a load of beer and pretend you're in medieval times. So heading on over to the other side of the docks now. So we've just this is the east side of the docks. A lot more residential places over here. Very few, no restaurants in fact. Medieval Banquet was the last restaurant in St Katharine's Docks. Across here, these are nice places to live. Some of the homes here will set you back millions of pounds. Pretty ugly though. They do have the advantage of the fact they have balconies overlooking the docks. This is a reasonably quiet area if you can ignore the city workers, at night time and during the day. But it is a reasonably quiet area. The building's clearly, late, mid 90s, maybe not, maybe the odd few of the late 90s. They're not going to wow you, but inside I'm sure they're very nice. A couple of famous people do live in St Katharine Docks. David Mellor, he's a British broadcaster and former politician. Penelope, Viscount of Cobham, and the actor David Suchet. You might remember him from Poirot. Other than that, not really much to report, in terms of, this is pretty much where the docks sort of comes to an end, really. It's a nice place to take a stroll. You could effectively walk along these docks and then walk all along the river, all the way to Canary Wharf along the river. You'd have to come in a few times via onto the cobbled streets, because some private residences and even pubs like the Prospect of Whitby, which is down in Wapping, sort of are basically so far out against the river you have to walk around them. So you can't have the river the entire way, at least on the north side. It's actually more accessible on the south side if you're trying to walk along the river. However, you're not going to be disappointed if you do try to walk along the river. There are some interesting sights along the way. And like I say, the one of the better pubs between here and Canary Wharf is the Prospect of Whitby, which I think is owned in part by Sir Ian McKellen. But I've never seen him there, and I was there literally just the other day. I almost forgot, right at the beginning of the video I mentioned that London Bridge and Tower Bridge having another story. Well, it's a well-known story actually. An American tycoon, I think back in the 60s, thought he was buying Tower Bridge, but in fact he bought London Bridge, which is a pretty damn ugly bridge, for something like, I think it was about $2.5 million. Now obviously this is a little bit distorted, and there's denial that he knew exactly which bridge he was buying, but many believe he thought he was buying Tower Bridge, but instead he bought London Bridge, and it got dismantled and sent to Arizona. I'm not entirely sure of how true that is, but maybe you guys can tell me if it's 100% true, but I've always thought it was very interesting. Yeah, so that's pretty much St Katharine's Dock. I'm now going to go into Waitrose and do my shop. And no, I appreciate you joining me on this journey. A little bit of a different journey. St Katharine's Dock is one of my local neighbourhoods, and just wanted to sort of give you a sort of walking tour of what that is like. Obviously, when you come to St Katharine's Docks, make sure that you check out some of the restaurants, check out the bars. Dickens Inn's very good. The Slug and Letters is actually okay. Some of the Natural Kitchen is very good. Like I think I stated it again. I'm repeating myself really, but make sure you come have a visit. It's just to the the northeast of Tower Bridge. It's worth checking out. Anyway, if you like this video, click subscribe. Click a like also. Leave a comment below. Hopefully you've already done that by the time you got to this point in the video, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.